The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor of the Riverside Hills mansion. Victoria Chen stood at her kitchen window, watching the gardeners trim the hedge that separated her property from the golf course. Everything looked perfect from the outside. The house, the cars, the manicured lawn. But perfection, she had learned, was just another word for empty. 6 months ago, her world had crumbled. 22 years of marriage ended with divorce papers and a cold handshake in a lawyer's office. Richard had moved on quickly, as successful men often do. Victoria heard through mutual friends that he was already dating someone new. Someone younger, someone who didn't know about his late nights at the office or his forgotten anniversaries. The house felt different now. Every room held memories she wanted to forget. The dining room where they used to host dinner parties. The living room where they pretended everything was fine. The bedroom where they stopped talking years before they stopped living together. Now it was just Victoria and the echoes of a life that never quite worked. She poured herself a cup of coffee, adding a splash of something stronger from the bottle she kept hidden behind the flour. It was Tuesday, which meant Denise would be coming to clean. Victoria had mixed feelings about this. Part of her was grateful for the company, even if it was professional. Another part of her resented having someone witness her falling apart. Denise Thompson had been cleaning the house for 3 years. She was reliable, thorough, and minded her own business. She arrived every Tuesday and Friday at 9 in the morning with her supplies and her quiet efficiency. Victoria knew very little about her personal life, which was exactly how she preferred it. Denise was part of the household staff, not a friend. But lately, Victoria found herself watching Denise work. There was something about the way she moved through the house, the way she hummed softly while she cleaned, the way she seemed content with her simple tasks. Victoria envied that contentment. She had everything money could buy, yet she felt empty inside. Denise had much less, yet she seemed genuinely happy. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Victoria opened it to find Denise standing there with her cleaning supplies, wearing her usual navy blue uniform and a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Denise said, stepping inside. She had been calling her Mrs. Chen for 3 years, even though Victoria had told her multiple times to call her Victoria. Some boundaries, it seemed, were important to maintain. "Morning," Victoria replied, not quite meeting her eyes. She had been drinking earlier than usual lately, and she worried it showed. Denise began her routine in the guest bathroom upstairs. She had learned the layout of the house well over the years. Start upstairs, work her way down, finish with the kitchen. She took pride in her work. Each bathroom got the same attention, each room the same care. It didn't matter that she was paid to clean. She was raised to do her best at whatever job she took on. As she worked, she could hear Mrs. Chen moving around downstairs. The television went on and off. Cabinets opened and closed. The woman seemed restless lately, more so since her husband moved out. Denise had worked for enough wealthy families to recognize the signs. Divorce was hard on everyone, but it seemed especially difficult for women who had built their entire identity around being someone's wife. Denise understood struggle in a different way. She was a single mother of 2 teenagers, working 3 different jobs to keep them in a good school district. She cleaned houses Tuesday through Friday, worked at an office building on weekends, and did bookkeeping for a small business in the evenings. Her days started at 5 in the morning and ended near midnight. But she was building something. Her daughter Crystal was a senior in high school, planning to study nursing. Her son David was a sophomore with dreams of becoming a teacher. Every hour she worked was an investment in their future. The Chen house was one of her better clients. Mrs. Chen paid well and on time. She didn't hover or criticize the way some wealthy clients did. She mostly kept to herself, which Denise appreciated. She had worked for families who treated their housekeeping staff like furniture, and others who wanted to be best friends. This professional distance worked for both of them, but something had changed in recent months. Mrs. Chen seemed sadder, more isolated. She started drinking earlier in the day. Denise could smell it on her breath during their brief interactions. She had also become more critical, finding fault with things that had never bothered her before. Last week she complained that the towels weren't folded properly. The week before she said the floor cleaner smelled too strong. Denise finished the bathrooms and moved to the bedrooms. The master bedroom was the saddest room in the house. The bed was always unmade on one side only. Expensive clothes were scattered around as if Mrs. Chen tried on different outfits but couldn't decide what looked right. The nightstand held an impressive collection of pill bottles and wine glasses. In the guest room, Denise found evidence of Mrs. Chen's sister's recent visit. Linda had flown in from California the month before, clearly worried about Victoria. Denise had heard raised voices during that visit, though she tried not to listen. Families had their problems, and it wasn't her place to judge. As she dusted the furniture, Denise thought about her own life. Tonight she would go home to her small apartment where Crystal would be studying for her SATs, and David would be working on a history project. They would eat dinner together at their small kitchen table, talking about their days. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was theirs. She moved downstairs to tackle the living areas. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup in her hand. She had changed clothes twice since morning, settling on expensive jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Denise made in a week. "The weather's nice today," Denise offered, trying to make conversation as she began cleaning the coffee table. Mrs. Chen turned around, and Denise could see that her eyes were red. Whether from crying or drinking, it was hard to tell. "Maybe both, is it?" Mrs. Chen asked, as if she hadn't noticed. "I wouldn't know. I haven't been outside in 3 days." Denise nodded sympathetically but didn't push the conversation. She had learned that wealthy people's problems were different from hers, but pain was still pain. Loss was still loss. Mrs. Chen was clearly struggling, even if her struggles came wrapped in designer clothes and expensive wine. The morning passed quietly. Denise worked her way through the house with her usual efficiency, while Mrs. Chen drifted from room to room like a ghost in her own home. By noon, most of the work was done, just the kitchen left, which was always the most time-consuming room. Neither woman knew that this Tuesday would be different from all the others. Neither could predict that by the end of the day, their carefully maintained professional relationship would be shattered, and both their lives would change forever. Sometimes the biggest moments start with the smallest things. The phone call came at exactly 12:30, just as Denise was starting on the kitchen. Victoria was sitting at the breakfast bar, picking at a salad she had no intention of finishing. The phone's ringtone cut through the quiet house like a blade. Victoria looked at the screen and her face went white. It was her friend Patricia, the kind of friend who only called when she had gossip to share. Victoria almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello, Patricia. Victoria, darling, I hope you're sitting down." Patricia's voice had that fake sweetness that meant bad news was coming. "I just saw the announcement in the society pages. Richard and that girl he's been seeing, they're engaged." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She knew Richard had moved on, but engaged? It had only been 6 months since their divorce was final. 6 months since 22 years of marriage ended with lawyers and paperwork. "When?" Victoria managed to ask. "The announcement says they're planning a Christmas wedding. Can you believe it? A Christmas wedding at his age? She must be pushing for it." Victoria could hear Patricia's voice continuing, but the words seemed to come from far away. A Christmas wedding. Richard had always said Christmas weddings were tacky when they were married. He said they took attention away from the holiday. But apparently that was just another one of his opinions that only applied to her. She hung up without saying goodbye and stared at her phone. Her hands were shaking. She walked to the cabinet where she kept the good wine, the bottles Richard had been collecting for special occasions that never came. She pulled out a bottle of red wine that cost more than most people made in a day, and opened it with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The first glass went down too fast. The second one followed quickly. By the third glass, the shaking had stopped, but something else had started. A burning feeling in her chest that felt like anger and heartbreak and humiliation all mixed together. Denise noticed the change immediately. Mrs. Chen had always been a quiet drinker, the kind who sipped wine from crystal glasses and tried to pretend it was sophisticated. But this was different. This was desperate drinking, the kind Denise recognized from her own father before he left when she was 12. She tried to focus on her work, cleaning the counters and organizing the pantry. But she could feel the tension in the room growing thicker with each glass Mrs. Chen poured. The woman was pacing now, muttering under her breath, checking her phone obsessively. 42 years old, Victoria said suddenly, her voice louder than necessary. "Did you know she's 42? 12 years younger than me. Not even young enough to be scandalous, just young enough to be better." Denise wasn't sure if she was expected to respond. She continued cleaning, hoping the moment would pass. But Mrs. Chen seemed to need an audience for her pain. 22 years, Victoria continued, her words starting to slur slightly. 22 years of my life. I gave him the best years, and now she gets the successful man, the established man. She gets the version of Richard Y helped create. The wine was talking now, and Denise knew from experience that wine rarely said kind things. She tried to make herself smaller, less noticeable, but the kitchen wasn't big enough to disappear in. I bet she doesn't even know about his snoring, Victoria said with a bitter laugh, or the way he leaves his socks on the bathroom floor, or how he never remembers birthdays unless someone reminds him 3 times. Denise finished wiping down the stove and moved to sweep the floor. Mrs. Chen was standing by the window again, staring out at nothing. You know what's funny? Victoria asked, though nothing about her tone suggested humor. I used to think I was lucky. Big house, nice cars, country club membership. I thought I had everything. She took another drink and turned to look at Denise directly for the first time that day. But you probably know better, don't you? You work hard every day, support your family, have a purpose. When was the last time I did anything that mattered? The question hung in the air uncomfortably. Denise didn't know how to respond. She had learned over the years that wealthy people sometimes wanted to have deep conversations with their staff, usually when they were drunk or lonely. It never ended well. I should finish up the kitchen, Denise said gently, hoping to redirect the conversation. But Victoria was just getting started. The wine and the phone call and 6 months of suppressed anger were all coming together in the worst possible way. Finish up the kitchen, Victoria repeated mockingly. Right, because that's what matters. Making sure everything looks perfect on the surface. She walked over to where Denise was sweeping and stood too close, invading her personal space in a way that made Denise uncomfortable. Tell me something, Victoria said, her breath heavy with wine. Do you think I'm pathetic? Rich woman can't even keep her husband interested, has to pay people to come to her house so she's not completely alone. Mrs. Chen, I think maybe you should sit down and have some water, Denise suggested carefully. Water? Victoria laughed harshly. Water isn't going to fix this. Nothing's going to fix this. She began following Denise around the kitchen as she worked, criticizing everything. The way she loaded the dishwasher, the brand of cleaning supplies she used, the fact that she had moved the salt shaker 2 inches to the left. I pay you to clean this house properly, Victoria said, her voice getting sharper with each complaint. But you can't even put things back where they belong. Denise had dealt with difficult clients before. She knew the best approach was to stay calm, finish the job, and leave. But something about Mrs. Chen's tone was different today. There was an edge to it that made her nervous. This towel isn't folded right, Victoria continued, picking up a kitchen towel that Denise had just hung on the oven handle. Look at this. It's crooked. How hard is it to fold a towel straight? I can fix that, Denise said quietly, reaching for the towel. Don't. Victoria pulled the towel away. Just don't. I'm tired of having to fix everything myself. I'm tired of people not caring about doing things right. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Victoria's angry breathing. Denise could see that they had crossed some invisible line, moved from awkward conversation into dangerous territory. She had been in this situation before with other clients, and she knew the best thing to do was remove herself from it. Mrs. Chen, she said carefully, I think maybe I should come back another day to finish. When you're feeling better. It was the wrong thing to say. Victoria's face changed and something cold and ugly appeared in her eyes. All the pain and humiliation and anger she had been carrying for months focused on those words. When you're feeling better, as if she was the problem, as if she was some unstable woman who couldn't handle her emotions. When I'm feeling better, Victoria repeated slowly. Are you saying I'm not well? Are you saying I can't handle my own life? No, ma'am, I just thought. You thought what? That you could come into my house, judge me, tell me what I should do? You work for me. You clean my toilets. Don't you dare try to manage me. The words hit Denise like slaps. In 3 years of working for Mrs. Chen, she had never heard her speak this way. But Denise had pride too, and there were some things she wouldn't accept from anyone, regardless of how much they paid her. I was trying to be respectful, Denise said, her voice still steady but with steel underneath. I'll just gather my things and go. And that's when everything fell apart completely. The moment Denise said she was leaving, something snapped inside Victoria. All the wine, all the pain, all the months of feeling powerless came rushing to the surface at once. She couldn't control Richard leaving. She couldn't control him marrying someone else. She couldn't control the whispers at the country club or the pitying looks from friends. But here in her own kitchen, she thought she could control something. "You don't get to just leave," Victoria said, stepping between Denise and the door. "I'm not done talking to you." Denise stopped gathering her cleaning supplies and looked directly at Victoria for the first time that day. She could see the desperation in the woman's eyes. The way alcohol and heartbreak had twisted her usual composed expression into something uglier. "Mrs. Chen, I understand you're upset, but I need to go," Denise said firmly. She had teenage children at home. She had 2 other jobs to get to. She didn't have time for rich people's breakdowns no matter how much they paid her. "Upset?" Victoria's voice rose to near shouting. "Upset doesn't begin to cover it. You have no idea what I'm going through. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything." The irony wasn't lost on Denise. Here was a woman standing in a kitchen that cost more than Denise would make in 5 years, complaining about losing everything. A woman who had never worried about rent or medical bills or whether her children would have decent clothes for school. "You're right," Denise said quietly. "I don't know what it's like to lose a husband to someone younger. But I do know what it's like to work 3 jobs to keep my children fed. I know what it's like to count every dollar and still come up short. So maybe we both know something about struggle." It was the most personal thing Denise had ever shared with Mrs. Chen, and definitely the most honest. For a moment, Victoria seemed to hear her. Something in her expression shifted, as if she was seeing Denise as a real person for the first time. But then her phone buzzed with a text message notification. Without thinking, she looked at it. It was from her sister Linda. Saw the engagement announcement. "Call me." The brief moment of connection shattered. All Victoria could think about was how everyone knew. Everyone had seen the announcement. Everyone knew that Richard had moved on while she was falling apart in an empty house, drinking wine in the middle of the day and having conversations with the help. 3 jobs, Victoria said mockingly. How noble. How hardworking. I bet you think that makes you better than me, don't you? "I don't think about you at all outside of this house," Denise replied honestly. "I clean your home, you pay me, and then I go live my life." That's how this works. The words stung because they were true. Victoria had built her entire identity around being Richard's wife, around being part of the wealthy social circle, around maintaining appearances. But to Denise, she was just a client. Just another house to clean, not a person worth thinking about. "Get out," Victoria said suddenly. "That's what I'm trying to do," Denise replied, picking up her supply box. "No, I mean get out and don't come back." "You're fired." Denise paused. She needed this job. The Chen house paid well and the work wasn't difficult. Losing it would mean scrambling to find another client, which wasn't always easy. But she had been fired before and she would manage somehow. She always did. "Fine," she said simply. "I'll send you a bill for today's work." She headed toward the door, but Victoria wasn't done. The alcohol and anger were a dangerous combination, and Victoria felt like she was losing control of everything, including this conversation. "Don't you walk away from me when I'm talking to you," Victoria called after her. Denise stopped and turned around. "What more is there to say?" "You fired me. I'm leaving." "That's what you wanted." "What I want," Victoria said, her voice getting louder and more slurred, "is for people to stop treating me like I'm invisible, like I don't matter, like I'm just some pathetic divorced woman who can't handle her life." "Nobody said you were pathetic," Denise replied, though privately she was beginning to think exactly that. "You didn't have to say it. I can see it in your face. Poor Mrs. Chen, drinking in the middle of the day, can't even keep her husband interested. You probably go home and laugh about it with your family. I go home and help my daughter with her college applications and make sure my son does his homework. I don't have time to think about your personal problems." It was brutal honesty, and it hit Victoria exactly where she was most vulnerable. She was right. Denise didn't care about her pain. Nobody did. She was completely alone with her humiliation and her empty house and her meaningless life. Victoria walked to the sink where she had left her glass of water from earlier that morning. Without thinking clearly, acting purely on impulse and rage, she picked it up and turned toward Denise. "You think you're so much better than me," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You think because you work hard and struggle that somehow makes you more worthy. Well, let me remind you of something." And then she threw the glass of water directly at Denise's face. Time seemed to slow down. The water hit Denise square in the face and chest, soaking her uniform and dripping onto the expensive kitchen floor. Ice cubes scattered across the marble. The glass itself hit the floor and shattered. For a moment, both women just stood there in shock. Victoria couldn't believe what she had just done. Denise couldn't believe it had happened. Denise felt the cold water dripping from her hair down her face. She could taste it on her lips. Her uniform was soaked through, clinging to her skin uncomfortably. But more than the physical discomfort was the humiliation, the deliberate degradation of what had just happened. She looked at Victoria, who was standing there with her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't believe her own actions. The expensive wine glass lay in pieces on the floor between them. "Did you just throw water at me?" Denise asked quietly, her voice deadly calm. Victoria seemed to snap back to the moment. Instead of apologizing, instead of being horrified by what she had done, she doubled down. The alcohol made her stupid and cruel. "Maybe now you'll remember who pays your salary," Victoria said, though her voice was shaking. "Maybe now you'll show some respect." Denise stood there dripping, processing what had just happened. In all her years of cleaning houses for wealthy families, nothing like this had ever occurred. She had dealt with difficult clients, rude clients, clients who treated her like she was invisible, but nobody had ever deliberately humiliated her like this. She thought about her children at home, about Crystal studying for her SATs and dreaming of becoming a nurse, about David working on his history project and talking about wanting to teach someday. She thought about all the houses she cleaned, all the hours she worked, all the sacrifices she made so her children could have better lives than she had. And she thought about standing here, soaking wet, while a rich woman, who had everything, looked at her like she was nothing without saying a word. Denise walked over to the counter where she had left her car keys. She picked them up, still dripping water on the expensive marble floor. She walked to where she had set down her cleaning supplies and picked up the box, ignoring the way the wet fabric of her uniform stuck to her skin. Victoria watched her, suddenly uncertain. The silence was worse than shouting would have been. At the kitchen door, Denise turned around one last time. She looked at Victoria standing there among the broken glass and spilled water, in her designer clothes and her beautiful empty house. "You can clean up your own mess," Denise said quietly, and then she walked out, leaving Victoria alone with what she had done. Denise sat in her car for a full 5 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Her hands were shaking, not from cold but from anger and humiliation. The wet fabric of her uniform stuck to her skin uncomfortably, reminding her with every breath of what had just happened. She had been cleaning houses for 8 years. She had dealt with clients who were demanding, clients who were rude, clients who acted like she was part of the furniture, but nobody had ever thrown anything at her. Nobody had ever tried to humiliate her like that. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light gave her more time to think, more time for the anger to build. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, she had made a decision. She was done being quiet. She was done accepting disrespect just because someone had more money than she did. Crystal was at the kitchen table when Denise walked in, surrounded by college brochures and practice SAT tests. At 17, she was already more focused than most adults, Denise knew. She looked up when her mother entered, and her expression immediately changed. "Mom, what happened? You're all wet." Denise looked down at herself. Her uniform was still damp, her hair was a mess, and she probably looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had been humiliated and was trying to hold it together. "A client threw water at me," she said simply. Crystal's jaw dropped. "What, are you serious? What did you do?" "I left." "Good. Did you call the police?" Denise almost smiled at her daughter's immediate outrage. Crystal had inherited her grandmother's fierce spirit and her mother's sense of justice. She had never learned to make herself small or accept disrespect quietly. "It's not that simple, baby. She didn't hurt me physically. She just—" Denise struggled to find the words. She wanted to make me feel small, and for a minute it worked. Crystal stood up and walked over to her mother. At 17, she was already taller than Denise, and she had the kind of confidence that came from being raised by a woman who worked 3 jobs and never complained. "Nobody gets to treat you like that. I don't care how much money they have. You work harder than anyone I know, and you deserve respect." "I know that," Denise said, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Do you? Because sometimes I think you accept things from these rich people that you wouldn't accept from anyone else." It was a fair point. Denise had learned to swallow a lot of small indignities in her work. Comments about her appearance, criticism of her methods being ignored when she said good morning. She told herself it was just part of the job, that she was paid to clean, not to be treated like family. But this was different. This wasn't a snide comment or a dismissive tone. This was deliberate cruelty, designed to hurt and humiliate. David came home from school an hour later and immediately sensed the tension in the apartment. At 15, he was quieter than his sister, but just as observant. When Crystal told him what had happened, his reaction was even stronger than hers. "You should sue her," he said simply. "That's assault. David, it was water, not acid. I don't care. She threw something at you. That's not okay." Denise looked at her children, both of them angry on her behalf, both of them ready to fight for her dignity in ways she hadn't been ready to fight for herself. She realized that she had taught them to respect themselves by watching her respect herself. What kind of lesson was she teaching them if she accepted this treatment quietly? That evening, she called her sister Maya, who lived across town with her husband and 2 young children. Maya had always been the louder, more confrontational of the 2 sisters. If anyone would understand Denise's anger, it would be her. "She did what?" Maya's voice rose 3 octaves when Denise finished telling the story. "Threw water at me, right in my face. Please tell me you called the police." "Maya, it's not that simple. These people, they have lawyers and connections and you have dignity and self-respect. Or at least you should." The words stung because they were true. Maya was right. Denise had been so focused on keeping her jobs, on maintaining the income she needed to support her family, that she had forgotten something important. She was worth more than the money they paid her. "What would you do?" Denise asked. "I'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person she really is. I'd make sure there were consequences. You can't let people treat you like that, Dee. You just can't." That night, Denise lay awake thinking about Victoria Chen standing in her expensive kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and spilled water. She thought about the look in the woman's eyes, not just anger, but something desperate and broken. She thought about the phone call that had triggered the whole incident, about a woman who had lost her husband and was clearly falling apart. It didn't excuse what Victoria had done. Nothing excused deliberately humiliating another human being, but it helped Denise understand it. Hurt people hurt people. It was an old saying, but that didn't make it less true. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria was having the worst night of her life. After Denise left, she had stood in her kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the broken glass and puddles of water on her floor. The silence of the house pressed in on her from all sides. She had thrown water at another human being. She had humiliated a woman who worked hard to support her family. She had acted like the worst kind of entitled rich person, the kind she had always claimed to despise. The alcohol was wearing off, replaced by a crushing sense of shame. She tried to clean up the broken glass herself, but her hands were shaking too badly. She ended up cutting her finger on a shard and bleeding on her expensive marble floor. She called her sister Linda in California, but hung up before it rang. What would she say? That she had thrown water at her housekeeper because she was upset about Richard's engagement? That she had become the kind of person who took out her pain on people who couldn't fight back? She poured herself another glass of wine, then poured it down the sink without drinking it. She was already in enough trouble. The last thing she needed was to make it worse. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Denise's face, the shock, the hurt, the quiet dignity as she walked out without saying anything worse than, "You can clean up your own mess." It was that dignity that haunted Victoria most. Even in that moment, even after being humiliated, Denise had maintained her composure in a way Victoria hadn't been able to manage. At 2 in the morning, Victoria found herself Googling Denise's name, trying to find some way to contact her. She found a listing for Thompson Cleaning Services with a phone number and an address. She wrote down the information, then crumpled up the paper. Then she smoothed it out again. She wanted to call and apologize, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Some things couldn't be fixed with a phone call and a bouquet of flowers. Some mistakes required more than just saying sorry. She thought about her life before the divorce, before the drinking, before the loneliness. She had been a different person then. Not perfect, but not cruel. Somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. The question was whether it was too late to find her way back. Both women spent that night staring at their ceilings, thinking about a moment that had changed everything. Denise was planning her next move, trying to decide how to respond to what had happened. Victoria was trying to figure out how she had become someone she didn't recognize. Neither of them knew that their story was far from over. That the worst moment would eventually lead to something neither of them expected. That sometimes the most broken situations can be the beginning of the most important changes. But that would come later. For now, they were just two women lying awake in the dark, trying to make sense of what had happened and what it meant for who they were going to be next. 4 days passed before Victoria worked up the courage to do what she knew she had to do. 4 days of barely eating, barely sleeping, and definitely not drinking. 4 days of staring at the piece of paper with Denise's address written on it in her own shaky handwriting. She had tried calling twice, but hung up before it rang. She had written 3 different letters but threw them all away. Nothing she could say seemed adequate. How do you apologize for stripping away someone's dignity? How do you explain that you were drowning in your own pain without making it sound like an excuse? On the 4th day, Victoria drove to Denise's neighborhood. It was a world away from Riverside Hills, with small apartment complexes and older houses that had been divided into duplexes. The cars were practical rather than luxurious. The lawns were small but well maintained. It was the kind of neighborhood where people worked hard for what they had. She found Denise's address and sat in her car across the street for an hour, watching. She saw a teenage girl leave the apartment with a backpack full of books. She saw lights go on and off in different windows. She saw normal life happening, the kind of life she had forgotten existed during her years in the wealthy bubble she had been living in. Finally, she got out of the car. Denise answered the door in work clothes, not her cleaning uniform, but the kind of practical outfit someone wears to an office job. She looked surprised to see Victoria standing there, but not shocked, as if she had been expecting this conversation eventually. "Mrs. Chen," she said quietly. "Please," Victoria said. "Call me Victoria. I think we're past formalities now." They stood there for a moment looking at each other. Victoria could see that Denise was trying to decide whether to invite her in or send her away. Finally, Denise stepped aside. "Come in, but I need to leave for work in 20 minutes. The apartment was small but immaculate. Family photos covered one wall. Graduation pictures, birthday parties, everyday moments captured and displayed with pride. The furniture was old but well maintained. Everything spoke of a family that took care of what they had because they knew how hard it was to get. Crystal was sitting at the kitchen table with homework spread everywhere. She looked up when her mother brought Victoria into the room, and her expression immediately hardened. She had heard the story. She knew exactly who this woman was. "Crystal, this is Mrs. Chen," Denise said carefully. "I know who she is," Crystal replied, not bothering to hide her hostility. Victoria felt the weight of that stare. This was what consequences looked like. Not just hurting Denise, but hurting her family, making her children angry and protective. She had thought her actions only affected one person, but she was wrong. "Maybe we could talk privately," Victoria suggested. "Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of my daughter," Denise replied firmly. Victoria nodded. She had no right to make demands here. She was in Denise's home now, playing by Denise's rules. "I came to apologize," Victoria began, then stopped. "No, that's not right. I came to try to apologize, but I'm not sure how. What I did was inexcusable. There's no explanation that makes it okay." Denise sat down at the kitchen table across from Crystal. She didn't invite Victoria to sit, so Victoria remained standing, which somehow felt appropriate. "I was drunk," Victoria continued, "and I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you. My ex-husband is getting remarried, and I felt like my whole life was falling apart. But that's not your fault, and it doesn't excuse what I did." "No, it doesn't," Crystal said before her mother could respond. "Crystal," Denise warned gently. "No, Mom. She needs to hear this. You work harder than anyone I know. You're putting me through school and helping David with his dreams, and you do it all without complaining. And this woman throws water at you because she's upset about her own problems? That's not okay." Victoria looked at this 17-year-old girl defending her mother with such fierce pride and felt ashamed all over again. This was what she had attacked. Not just Denise, but a family that was built on hard work and love and mutual respect. "You're absolutely right," Victoria said to Crystal. "It's not okay. Your mother deserves better than the way I treated her. So why did you do it?" Crystal asked directly. It was the question Victoria had been asking herself for 4 days. Why had she taken out her pain on someone who had done nothing wrong? Why had she acted like the kind of person she had always claimed to despise? Because I was in pain and I wanted someone else to hurt too, Victoria said honestly. Because I felt powerless and I wanted to feel like I had control over something. Because I was drunk and angry and I forgot that you were a real person with feelings and a family who loves you. She turned to Denise. I forgot that you weren't just someone I paid to clean my house. I forgot that you were a human being who deserved respect regardless of what job you did or how much money you made. Denise had been quiet during this exchange, studying Victoria's face as she spoke. Now she leaned forward slightly. What do you want from me? She asked. Nothing, Victoria replied immediately. I don't want anything. I just needed you to know that I know what I did was wrong. I needed you to know that it wasn't about you. It was about me being a broken person who did something terrible. Are you expecting me to forgive you? Victoria thought about that. I'm hoping you will eventually, but I'm not expecting it. I know forgiveness has to be earned, and I know this conversation doesn't erase what happened. Denise glanced at her daughter, then back at Victoria. Why should I believe that you've actually changed? How do I know this isn't just guilt talking? It was a fair question. Victoria had been asking herself the same thing. Was she here because she was genuinely sorry, or just because she felt bad about herself? You don't know, Victoria admitted. I can't prove that I've changed with one conversation. I can only show you through my actions going forward. And I understand if you never want to see me again. I understand if you never want to give me the chance to prove anything. She paused, gathering her courage for what she needed to say next. But I hope you will. Not because I deserve it, but because I think we both deserve better than leaving this the way it is. You deserve to know that your dignity matters, that what happened to you was wrong and that it will never happen again. And I deserve the chance to be better than the worst thing I've ever done. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of the refrigerator humming and traffic outside. Crystal was still watching Victoria with suspicion, but some of the hostility had faded from her expression. Denise was thinking, weighing Victoria's words against her own sense of justice and forgiveness. I need time, Denise said finally. I need time to think about this. Of course, Victoria said. Take all the time you need. She started to leave, then turned back. One more thing. I'm starting therapy, and I'm getting help for my drinking. Not because I think that fixes what I did, but because I don't want to be the kind of person who hurts other people anymore. After Victoria left, Crystal and Denise sat at their kitchen table in silence for several minutes. What do you think? Denise asked finally. I think she's trying, Crystal said slowly. I think she's scared and ashamed and she knows she messed up. But Mom, that doesn't mean you have to forgive her. Some things can't be fixed just because someone says sorry. I know, Denise replied, but maybe some things can be made better. Maybe not fixed, but better. She thought about Victoria standing in their small kitchen, looking lost and broken and genuinely remorseful. She thought about her own anger and hurt, but also about the possibility of healing, not forgetting what had happened but finding a way forward that didn't leave both of them trapped in that terrible moment forever. What are you going to do? Crystal asked. I don't know yet, Denise said honestly, but I think I'm going to give her a chance to prove she meant what she said. Outside, Victoria sat in her car for a few minutes before driving away. She had done what she came to do. She had faced the person she had hurt and acknowledged the harm she had caused. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a beginning. For the first time in months, she felt like she might be able to find her way back to being someone she could respect. It would take time and work and probably more uncomfortable conversations, but for the first time since her world fell apart, Victoria felt like there might be a path forward. Both women had learned something that day. Victoria had learned that true apologies require more than words. They require change. And Denise had learned that sometimes the people who hurt us are just broken people who need to find their way back to being whole. The story wasn't over. Healing takes time and trust has to be rebuilt slowly. But sometimes, the worst moments in our lives can become the beginning of our best moments if we're brave enough to do the hard work of becoming better people.